50 years from now, only a small group of people will own property and the rest of the world will be renting from them. We know this because when home prices went up between 2010 and 2020, this is how that extra wealth was distributed. 71% went to high-income households, 26% went to middle income, and 4% went to low income. When we say wealth is moving upwards, this is what we mean. Welcome to Alux, the place where future billionaires come to get inspired. All right, so let's start off today's discussion by looking at how property ownership became possible in the first place. So before you start thinking that things were better in the past, you should know that having three economic classes, poor, middle, and rich, is actually very unusual. For most of human history, there was no middle class. Owning a home was for the rich only. Land, farms, and homes were controlled by kings, nobles, merchants, or landlords, and everyone else rented or worked on the land. Regular people didn't have access to credit. Their wages were so low they could barely afford food, let alone property, and the strict inheritance laws kept ownership locked within rich families. Owners decided who could live where and who had jobs, so generations stayed in the same class, with no real chance to move up the money-making ladder. There was rich and poor, and the rich owned property while the poor rented from them and worked for them. For centuries, the divide between rich property owners and poor renters was the norm. Back in the 1800s, the bottom 50% of people held around 5 to 15% of global income. The top 10% had 50 to 60%, and the top 1% had around 6 to 9%. 90% of people were considered poor, which meant they had just enough money for food and rent, and not much left for education or healthcare. And then, things started changing. It started slowly with the Industrial Revolution and workers being paid higher wages, but it all really kicked off with the end of World War II, because there was a bit of a post-war housing boom. Back in the 1950s, the median household income was around $3,300, and the home price was $7,400. So if you wanted to buy a home, it would cost you about 2.2 times what your household made in a year. This was also a single income, and that was enough to buy a house, pay off a mortgage in 15 to 20 years, pay your bills, and still have money left over to save. And that kind of middle-class wealth and ownership had never happened before. During the war, spending kind of went on pause because resources were so scarce, and men, the main wage earners, were away at war. When the war ended, three key things happened. All of the men who had fought came back to wages they hadn't spent. Women were a part of the workforce now because they'd taken over the jobs that men had to leave while they were away, so there was another income for the home. And millions of people started their family life at the same time, and they all needed a place to live. By 1950, there was suddenly a middle class. Around 23% of people were in this bracket, and for the first time ever, they could afford to own property. Countries like the US, UK, and Australia built millions of homes quickly, and they persuaded banks to lower their interest rates so everyone could have a chance of borrowing money. A family didn't need a huge amount of cash to buy a home. As long as they had a steady job, banks would approve a low-interest loan, and governments and builders would work together to make sure there was enough housing to meet demand, so prices were pretty reasonable. Over time, owning a home became a cultural milestone. It symbolized stability, security, and moving up the financial ladder. Owning a home was part of the middle-class dream, and it set an expectation that to be considered successful, you have to own a home. Ownership moved from being a privilege for the wealthy to something millions of ordinary families could achieve. But the middle class was an exception, not the rule. The rise of the middle class after World War II wasn't the natural order of things. It was a historical fluke when a great economy, cheap credit, and mass building opened the door to regular people. The post-war boom disrupted this pattern, but it didn't erase it. This window of home ownership was pretty fragile. By the 1970s, the conditions that had made it possible began to shift. From the 1950s to the 80s, the median cost of a home to what a household earned stayed pretty steady, and then from the 80s to around 2019, that number crept up from 2.9 times to 3.9 times the cost. Today, buying a house costs about 5.6 times more than what the average household makes. The system is actually reverting to what it had been true to for centuries: property and wealth concentrating in fewer hands while the majority rent. Which brings us to part 2 of this discussion: the system that made homes unaffordable again. Regular people are losing their grip on property ownership, and the reason is down to simple math. Home prices have increased much faster than wages. If you think of buying property as going through a series of filters that gradually lock out regular buyers and let the wealthy through, this sequence would look kind of like this. There's not enough homes being built to meet demand, and there's one main culprit for this: the law. In his book Abundance, the journalist Ezra Klein says that this housing scarcity is a choice. Policies that look like they should protect communities, like zoning and environmental laws, actually stall housing developments, and they do it deliberately. Now, just to be clear here, these laws and regulations are mainly in the United States, Canada, and Europe. Developing countries like India, China, and Brazil don't have these rules or these problems at the same level. Like in Los Angeles, 75% of residential land is zoned for single-family housing only. You can't build apartments, townhouses, or duplexes there. And city rules limit how many homes can be built in each neighborhood. These rules started in the early 20th century to separate homes from factories or noisy businesses. But over time, they became a way for homeowners to control what gets built in their neighborhoods. So now it limits housing supply and pushes prices up, which means it's also a way for landowners to make more money. The stricter the zoning laws, the less competition they'll have for building property, and the more people will have to pay them. All of the prices for building increased, including fees and permits, materials, and workers. And because of this, builders mostly build expensive homes where they could make a bigger profit, instead of cheaper homes for first-time buyers. Building apartment buildings for first-time buyers isn't as profitable for anyone, not the bank or landowners, as it would be building an expensive single-family home. And when there aren't enough homes where people need them, prices climb faster than incomes. And this is the moment when you need to kick the door open so you get past the first filtering system. And guess what, my friend? We designed the Alux app to help you do just that. Our app is packed with advice on how to start a business, invest your money, and cut costs. We've even got courses on communication and how to negotiate, basically all the tools you need to make sure the door doesn't close on you. If this is something you want and need, we've got your back with a special discount. Download the app, scan this QR code on screen, and you'll get 25% off your yearly membership on us. But now let's get back to the topic at hand, shall we? So, regular buyers are still in the game at this stage, but it already requires saving longer and competing harder. And demand only compounds this problem. Too many people are chasing in the same areas. In the US, the population has grown from about 150 million in 1950 to over 330 million today. And it's the same story across the world, especially in big cities like London, New York, and Sydney. Over the past 70 years, people moved from working on farms and in factories to working in cities and service economies. And all of those jobs are in big cities. People move to where the jobs are. And everyone wants smaller homes because they're marrying later, having fewer kids, or living alone. In the 1950s, the average US household had about 3.5 people. Today, it's more like 2.5. So a city that once needed 100,000 homes to house 350,000 people now needs 140,000 homes for the same population. All of this pushes prices up even faster, and then the third filter kicks in. Debt becomes a trap for regular people. Once buyers turn to debt to keep up, the system splits. In the post-war years, debt was small and affordable compared to income. When a starter home cost 2 times a family's annual income in the 1950s, saving a down payment took just a few years. But now that homes are more than 5 times the annual income, saving for that same down payment takes a decade longer. After the 2008 recession, banks raised interest rates, so even if the prices of properties stayed the same, the mortgage payments were much higher. You needed bigger down payments and better credit scores before they would even approve a mortgage. Even people with good jobs struggle to save for a deposit or qualify for a mortgage without taking on massive debt. The mortgage payment on a $400,000 home goes from $1,700 to $2,700 if the interest rates rise by just 4%, and the loan will cost more if you don't have any other assets or if you're living in it. While regular people are borrowing at higher interest rates, rich people get cheap credit because their existing assets make them safer borrowers. With a lower interest rate, they can buy assets that earn more money than the cost of the loan. So they make money when they take on debt. This is the filter that pushes most middle-class buyers out of the race altogether. Then they wait for recessions because recessions are a reset for the rich. When the economy slows, regular buyers are most at risk for job losses, reduced hours, or higher interest payments, so a lot of them have to sell their homes. There's also fewer buyers in the market, so property prices dip. For the wealthy, this is the perfect buying window. It's like Black Friday. They've got cash reserves to access cheap credit, so they can scoop up properties at steep discounts while everyone else is locked out. After the economy recovers, those properties climb in value, leaving the wealthy with a bigger share of the market than what they had before. They follow a buy, borrow, and repeat cycle. Their portfolio grows faster than a family can save for a single down payment. When that happens across a whole city, the floor price of housing rises. Ordinary families who used to be the main buyers get pushed into renting. When the pandemic hit and there was so much uncertainty in the economy, interest rates dropped below 3%. The rich could borrow money cheaply, and they saw an opportunity to stock up on property, and this drove up home prices fast. In the US, the median price jumped by over 40% between 2020 and 2023. And every downturn speeds up this transfer of ownership. The 2008 financial crisis turned hundreds of thousands of foreclosed homes into rental properties for private equity firms. The same thing happened during the 2020 pandemic, when investors bought aggressively as rates dropped and uncertainty spiked. Each cycle makes it harder and harder for regular buyers to catch up, because property essentially becomes a way to park wealth. The final barrier here is financialization. The wealthy start treating homes like assets, not places to live. They buy properties to park cash or generate rental income, which locks up supply and keeps prices high. And this actually gained traction in the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan in the US and Margaret Thatcher in the UK. Housing stopped being seen as mainly a shelter and started being treated as a financial asset. They reduced taxes on capital gains and loosened financial laws for people over a certain tax bracket. Domestic investors started buying up multiple properties for rental income. Foreign buyers bought property in London, New York, Sydney, and Vancouver as a way to protect wealth from unstable economies back home. Then hedge funds and private equity firms entered the market and turned homes into scalable portfolios. Homes became assets to trade, leverage, and use as collateral. And real estate investment trusts, or REITs, let investors buy shares in massive property portfolios. After the 2008 recession, private equity firms bought hundreds of thousands of foreclosed homes at discounts of 30 to 50%. The same pattern repeated during the 2020 pandemic dip. Mortgage-backed securities turned home loans into products for Wall Street. By 2022, institutional investors like BlackRock and Invitation Homes owned hundreds of thousands of single-family homes, especially in fast-growing cities like Austin, Phoenix, and Atlanta. This is how wealth compounds, generation after generation, until the housing market becomes something the wealthy dominate. And that is the end of the funnel. And now we're here. So what will the next 50 years look like? When most people rent and only the rich own, housing stops being a way to build stability and becomes just another expense like groceries or gas. People pay rent every month but never build equity, which means they never build real wealth. That wealth flows upward to the owners who collect rent on properties they bought years earlier. Over time, the owners grow richer without doing very much, while renters stay stuck in the same cycle no matter how hard they work. Jobs start to feel less secure, too. Without ownership, families are more mobile, but not by choice. They have to move when rent goes up or when landlords decide to sell. Communities weaken because fewer people stay in the same neighborhoods long enough to build deep roots. Schools, local businesses, and even friendships feel less stable because people in those places are always turning over. And you can see this future already in today's data. The richest 1% already own about 38% of global wealth, and the bottom half of the world owns 2%. In the US, first-time homebuyers fell from 50% in 2010 to 24% in 2024. It's the same story in England and the rest of Europe. We have to say it, though, that on a global view, the story looks a little bit different. China also has millions of people looking for jobs in the same areas, but they have looser building laws, so the supply is able to meet demand. It's the same story in India and Brazil. Massive urbanization, but ownership is stable because there are fewer regulations. So if you don't own a home just yet, you've got two options, okay? Change the game or play the game. To change the game, we would need to drastically loosen zoning laws and environmental regulations so we can build houses where people actually want to live. Put taxes on empty homes for speculative buying. Push for shared equity programs for first-time buyers, lower taxes, and lower mortgage rates. The only issue here is that policymakers, well, they've got enough money to benefit from the problem, so why would they try to solve it? All right, now to play this game, you have to become rich yourself, and guess what? You're in the right place for that. That's all we've got time for today, my friend, but if you're ready to get rich, we've got hundreds of videos to help you get there, and even better, we've got the Alux app. Remember to download it now, scan this QR code, and sign up to get that discount. You are well on your way, Aluxer, and we're so happy to have you with us. I'll see you back here next time. Until then, take care.